A raise? You should be grateful we even keep you. Donald Henderson laughed, his voice bouncing off the conference room walls. I sat perfectly still in my chair, the quarterly performance review folder open before me. 7 years of exceptional evaluations. 7 years without a single pay increase. Walter, your request is ambitious considering market conditions. Clara Montgomery, the chief financial officer, tilted her head with exaggerated sympathy. The leadership team exchanged knowing glances around the table. 8 people who collectively made decisions about my worthwhile, knowing nothing about what I actually did for them. I developed the calibration method that increased our precision by 37%, I said, keeping my voice steady. Production time was cut in half. The Eastbrook contract alone, which we secured through aggressive negotiation tactics. Roger Albright, the vice president of sales, interrupted, though we both knew it was my technical specifications that won that deal. I have trained 16 junior technicians since I started. I have personally troubleshot critical issues for our top clients. The European expansion would have collapsed if I had not. Team effort, Walter. Donald cut in, drumming his fingers on the polished surface. Everyone pulls their weight here. My salary has not changed since I was hired. I am only asking to align with current industry standards. Donald leaned back, exchanging amused glances with the others. Industry standards are for average contributors. If you want extraordinary compensation, show us extraordinary results. My chest tightened. The calibration breakthrough I had pioneered had generated millions of dollars. Last quarter's report, which I was not supposed to have seen, attributed a 28% profit increase directly to proprietary technical innovations. The numbers speak for themselves, I said, sliding the market research across the table. Engineers with my qualifications and output are compensated at least 30% higher. Donald did not even glance at my carefully prepared documents. He simply pushed them back. A raise? You should be grateful we even keep you. The vice president laughed during my review. The whole leadership team nodded in agreement. I stood up, placed an envelope on the table, and said, "Thank you for your time. My name is Walter Jennings. Until 3 weeks ago, I was the lead calibration engineer at Pinnacle Industrial Solutions. Not that you would know it from my title, which remained technical specialist, despite my responsibilities expanding year after year. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, taking apart every device in our house, much to my parents' dismay. By 12, I could reassemble a vacuum cleaner with improved suction. At 16, I modified my high school's physics lab equipment to achieve measurements their budget could never afford. My engineering professors in college called me Precision Walter T. Called me, a nickname that followed me into my professional life. When I joined Pinnacle, I was grateful for the opportunity. The company manufactured industrial equipment for sectors ranging from aerospace to medical technology. My starting salary seemed reasonable for a recent graduate, and the promise of growth kept me motivated through long hours and demanding projects. The calibration breakthrough came during my second year. For months, I had noticed inconsistencies in our testing apparatus, tiny variations that others dismissed as acceptable margin. But in precision manufacturing, those margins represented the difference between excellence and adequacy. I spent weekends experimenting with alternative methods, using my own equipment purchased piece by piece for my modest salary. The solution came to me at 3 in the morning, a hybrid approach that integrated digital measurements with mechanical fine-tuning in a sequence nobody had tried before. When I demonstrated my method to the engineering team, the results were immediate. Precision improved dramatically while cutting calibration time from 6 hours to just under 3. The production floor implemented my technique within a week, and suddenly our products outperformed every competitor in accuracy tests. Orders increased, quality complaints disappeared. Client retention hit 100% for the first time in company history. I waited for recognition, a promotion, a bonus, even just acknowledgement in the company newsletter. Instead, in the quarterly meeting, my innovation was presented as our new proprietary method, with no mention of my name. Donald took questions from impressed board members while I sat silently in the back row. "This is how business works," my colleague Neil Porter told me afterward. "Individual recognition is not how you advance here. Be patient." So, I was patient. I trained new hires on my calibration method. I documented every step so production would not suffer during my rare sick days. I answered calls from clients at midnight when their equipment needed emergency adjustments. The European expansion came in my 5th year. Regulatory standards differed significantly from American requirements, and the first shipment of machines failed inspections spectacularly. The expansion team was in crisis with millions of dollars in equipment, sitting in warehouses unusable. "Walter, we need solutions, not explanations," Donald said during the emergency meeting. "Either fix this or we will find someone who can." I canceled plans for the next 6 weekends. My relationship with Brenda ended when I missed her sister's wedding. I redesigned critical components, revised testing protocols, and created new calibration standards specifically for European requirements. By the 7th week, our equipment passed inspection with scores exceeding local manufacturers. The company celebrated the successful expansion with a party I could not attend. I was on a video call with German technicians, walking them through implementation. Each year, my performance reviews praised my dedication and technical expertise. Each year, my compensation remained unchanged. When I raised the issue, I was told the company was restructuring or consolidating resources. I watched newer employees, usually men with half my experience, negotiate starting salaries higher than what I was making after 6 years. "That is just how negotiation works," Human Resources explained when I inquired. "Your performance is valued, but we cannot disrupt internal equity by adjusting established employees." So I stopped asking and started applying elsewhere. The job offers came quickly. My reputation in the industry had spread despite Pinnacle's effort to brand my innovations as their collective achievement. I declined 3 positions out of misplaced loyalty before an unexpected email arrived in my personal inbox. "Your calibration method has revolutionized equipment precision standards," wrote Eleanor Kingsley, director of the National Quality Certification Authority. "We are creating a new position, Chief Innovation Officer, to modernize certification protocols across the industry. Based on your contributions to the field, we would like to discuss your interest." The authority sets the standards that every manufacturer in our sector must meet. Their certification is the difference between market access and bankruptcy. Their offer included compensation that made my current salary look like a clerical error, plus authority to shape industry practices. I met with Eleanor for dinner, intending only to gather information. 3 hours later, surrounded by empty plates and pages of notes about potential improvements to certification standards, I realized I had found my path forward. "I need 2 weeks to properly transition my current projects," I told her as we parted. "Take the time you need," she replied. "We have waited years for someone with your vision. A few more weeks will not matter." I decided to give Pinnacle one final chance. I prepared extensive documentation showing my contributions, market salary data, and a modest request that would still leave me underpaid but would acknowledge my value. I scheduled my annual review early and arrived with hope that rationality might prevail. Instead, I got laughter and dismissal from Donald. As I walked back to my workstation after the meeting, a strange calm settled over me. 7 years of doubt about my worth dissolved in an instant. Their reaction was not a negotiation tactic. It was a revelation of how they truly saw me. Disposable despite being irreplaceable. I sent a brief email accepting Eleanor's offer before starting my afternoon tasks. That evening, I drafted my resignation letter. 2 paragraphs, professional and concise. I mentioned no grievances, made no accusations. I simply stated that I would be departing in 2 weeks to pursue another opportunity and would ensure all my projects were properly transitioned. I slipped the letter into an envelope and placed it in my bag for tomorrow. My phone lit up with a text from Neil. "How did the review go?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying exactly as expected. The next morning, I arrived at work as usual. I greeted security, prepared my workstation, and began addressing urgent client requests. At precisely 9:30, I walked to the conference room where the leadership team was having their daily briefing. I knocked once and entered. 8 pairs of eyes turned to me with mild surprise. "Walter, we are in the middle of something," Donald said, annoyed at the interruption. I approached the table silently and placed the envelope in the center. Thank you for your time, I said, and walked out, closing the door behind me. The envelope remained unopened for 3 days. I continued working, documenting processes and training colleagues on aspects of my role that only I understood. No one mentioned my unusual appearance at the leadership meeting. No one asked about the envelope. On the third day, while I was calibrating equipment for our newest client, my phone began vibrating continuously in my pocket. 6 missed calls from Human Resources, 4 from Donald, 2 from Clara. I turned it off and finished my calibration. When I returned to my desk, Heather from Human Resources was waiting. Walter, she lowered her voice, Donald opened your letter. He is concerned. Can we talk privately? I followed her to a small conference room where Donald and Clara were already seated. Donald pushed my resignation letter across the table. What is this? He asked as though the clearly stated resignation was written in hieroglyphics. My 2 weeks' notice, I replied. I have accepted another position. Where? Clara demanded. I would prefer not to discuss that until I begin my new role. Donald leaned forward, his demeanor transformed from yesterday's mockery to today's desperation. Walter, we may have been hasty during your review. Let's revisit your compensation request. The leadership team was having a difficult day, Heather added. We value your contributions tremendously. I appreciate that, I said, but I have already accepted another offer. Whatever they are paying, we will match it, Clara said. I thought about 7 years of denied requests, of watching less qualified colleagues advance while I remained stationary, of weekend work and midnight troubleshooting, of innovations attributed to the company rather than to me. This is not about money, I said, though partly it was. It is about finding the right opportunity for my career growth. We can create a new position, Donald offered. Senior technical specialist with a team reporting to you. Thank you, but my decision is final. They continued with escalating offers as though negotiating with a hostage taker. By the time I left that room, they had promised a 50% raise, a director title, and a seat on the Innovation Committee, the same committee that had rejected my improvement proposals for years. I declined each offer with increasing certainty. The next 2 weeks were surreal. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged me for years suddenly wanted lunch. Executives who could not remember my name stopped by my workstation with technical questions that revealed how little they understood about our own products. I documented everything meticulously. Calibration procedures, troubleshooting protocols, client-specific modifications. I created training materials for processes I had previously maintained alone. I transferred knowledge accumulated over 7 years into organized files accessible to anyone who might need them. On my final day, I handed over my projects to 3 different engineers, each taking a portion of my responsibilities. My desk, always minimal, took less than 10 minutes to clear. Donald appeared as I was signing final paperwork with Human Resources. This is a mistake, Walter, Donald said, following me toward the exit. You are throwing away 7 years of building your career here. I stopped at the security desk and handed over my badge. Those 7 years provided valuable experience. I am grateful for that. At least tell us where you are going, he pressed as we reached the lobby. We should stay in touch. I considered various responses before settling on the simple truth. The National Quality Certification Authority. Today was my last day here, but I do not start there for 3 weeks. I am taking some time off. His face paled. In what capacity, Chief Innovation Officer? Donald's expression collapsed into something between panic and disbelief. He knew, as everyone in our industry knew, that the authority's standards determine which products reached the market and which failed. Their certification process could accelerate or destroy a company's future. His voice dropped to a whisper. We should talk about this. We have had 7 years to talk, I replied. Goodbye, Donald. I walked through the glass doors into the bright spring sunshine, the weight of unappreciated years falling away with each step toward my car. Those 3 weeks between jobs were the first real break I had taken since college. I visited my parents in their quiet lake house in northern Michigan, hiked trails in the state parks that I had always been too busy to explore during my grueling tenure at Pinnacle, and finally slept past sunrise without setting a single alarm. My mind, which had been in a constant state of hypervigilance, began to settle. I declined 14 calls from various Pinnacle manufacturing numbers, recognizing Donald's and Clara's office extensions immediately, and deleted their urgent voicemails unheard. On my first day at the authority, Eleanor personally showed me to my office, an actual office with a door and windows, not the shared workstation I had occupied for 7 years. The certification standards have not been substantially updated in nearly a decade, she explained. Technology has evolved, but our requirements have not kept pace. Your first project is to modernize our approach, particularly in precision measurement protocols. I spent my first month learning the organization, reviewing current standards, and identifying outdated requirements. By the 6th week, I drafted preliminary revisions that would raise industry standards to reflect current technological capabilities. We sat in the glass-walled conference room of the National Quality Certification Authority for hours analyzing the feedback loops and calibration logs. These are significant changes, noted Oliver Finch, the technical review director, during our planning meeting. Some manufacturers will struggle to comply. It will require them to completely overhaul their software infrastructure. Any manufacturer using current best practices will meet these standards with minimal effort, I replied. The changes primarily affect those using outdated methods or taking shortcuts like ignoring calibration drift over time, hoping the inspectors will not notice the variance. Exactly like that, Oliver asked, looking up from his tablet. Exactly like that, I said, thinking of how Pinnacle routinely extended recalibration intervals to save costs, a practice I had repeatedly flagged as potentially dangerous in my monthly reports. The standards revision process took 3 months of meticulous work, peer review, and industry consultation. Throughout, I maintained strict professional ethics, never targeting specific manufacturers or creating requirements that only benefited certain companies. The new standards simply reflected what was truly possible with modern technology, precision levels I had personally achieved years earlier. When the updated standards were published, my phone rang within hours. Walter, it is Neil Porter from Pinnacle. Have you seen what the authority just released? I wrote what the authority just released, I replied. These precision requirements, the calibration schedules, they are impossible. They are not impossible. I implemented similar standards at Pinnacle 3 years ago, but they were never formally adopted because of cost concerns. Silence stretched across the line before Neil spoke again. Our certification renewal is due next month. We are nowhere near compliant with these new requirements. The authority offers implementation consulting for companies transitioning to the new standards, I said, reciting our official position. I can refer you to that department if you would like. Neil declined. I later learned Pinnacle had hired an external consultant at premium rates. 2 weeks later, my assistant notified me that Pinnacle Industrial Solutions had requested an expedited pre-assessment review, a service we offered to companies concerned about their certification status. So the review was assigned to one of our senior inspectors, maintaining my professional distance from my former employer. The inspector's report arrived on my desk with a large red flag notification. Pinnacle's equipment failed to meet the new standards by significant margins. Their calibration procedures were outdated, their precision measurements inconsistent, and their quality control documentation inadequate. I forwarded the report to our certification committee with standard recommendations for improvement paths. No special treatment, positive or negative, just the facts. 3 days later, Donald called my direct line. Walter, he began without greeting. We need to discuss these new certification requirements. All communication regarding certification should go through official channels, I replied. The implementation team can assist with your transition plan. This is not about implementation, he snapped. These standards are clearly designed to target our processes specifically. This feels personal. The standards apply equally to all manufacturers in the sector, I said. Many companies are already in compliance. Others are successfully implementing updates. You know exactly what you are doing, he accused. You are using your position to punish us for not giving you that raise. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. Donald, I am recording this call as per authority policy for all certification discussions. Would you like to rephrase your statement for the record? He hung up. Pinnacle's formal certification review came due while I was presenting at an international standards conference in Vienna. The conference was a whirlwind of keynote speeches, panel discussions, and technical workshops, providing a welcome distraction from the brewing corporate drama back home. The committee evaluated their application without my input, following our established protocols to prevent any appearance of bias. I had recused myself from the decision-making process entirely, ensuring the evaluation remained objective and clean. Their findings, provisional certification only, with mandatory compliance checks every 30 days until full standards were met. In industry terms, this was a significant blow. Provisional certification carried limitations on new contracts and required disclosures to existing clients about compliance status. For a company that had previously enjoyed automatic renewals, thanks largely to my behind-the-scenes corrections before official inspections, this represented both a practical and reputational crisis. Upon my return, I found 27 messages from various Pinnacle executives, escalating in urgency and desperation. I responded with a single email directing all certification inquiries to our official channels, copying our ethics compliance officer to maintain transparency. The industry summit 6 months later highlighted how dramatically standards had shifted. My keynote presentation on precision requirements for next-generation manufacturing drew attendees from 4 continents. In the front row sat Pinnacle's leadership team, including Donald and Clara, taking notes with the focused attention of students before a final exam. During the networking reception afterward, Roger Albright from Pinnacle approached me, champagne glass in hand, but sobriety in his expression. "Impressive presentation," he said. "We have hired 3 specialists to implement the new standards, but progress is challenging." "Quality improvement is always a journey," I replied neutrally. "We have invested nearly $7 million in equipment upgrades," he continued, his tone carrying a mix of resentment and forced camaraderie. "Ironically, these are the same upgrades you requested in your last budget proposal, with us, the one Donald rejected as unnecessary overhead." I sipped my water, saying nothing, letting the silence work for me. Roger took a long sip of his drink and looked around the crowded reception room before continuing. "The thing is," Roger lowered his voice, "we are still struggling with the calibration protocol. The documentation you left was not quite complete." "The documentation was comprehensive for the methods in use at that time," I corrected him. "The new standards required different approaches." "Which you pioneered," he noted. "Look, Donald wants to meet with you privately to discuss consulting opportunities." I maintained my professional smile. "Authority staff are prohibited from private consulting with entities we certify. That would represent a conflict of interest." "He is prepared to make it worth your while," Roger pressed. "That would be illegal," I stated firmly, "and this conversation is becoming inappropriate." As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "You do not understand. Without full certification by quarter's end, we lose the Eastbrook contract. That is 30% of our annual revenue." I gently removed his hand. "Then I suggest you focus your energy on meeting the standards rather than circumventing them." As I walked away, Clara intercepted me near the exhibition hall entrance. "Walter," she began with artificial warmth, "you look wonderful. This new position clearly agrees with you." "Thank you," I replied. "If you will excuse me, I have a panel discussion to moderate." "Just 1 minute," she persisted, stepping closer as the ambient noise of the exhibition hall swelled. "We have been doing some restructuring at Pinnacle, creating a new division focused on precision technology advancement. The board has approved an exceptional compensation package for the right leadership candidate. We are talking about a 6-figure sign-on bonus, substantial stock options, and a direct line to the chief executive officer. It is everything you ever wanted when you were with us." I met her gaze directly. "Are you offering me a job, Clara?" "We are exploring possibilities with someone who understands our unique challenges, someone who could help us meet the new certification standards, someone who recognizes the practical realities of implementation timelines," she countered. I smiled politely. "I believe the authority's implementation guidelines already provide realistic timelines for companies committed to quality improvement." "Companies that can survive those timelines," she muttered. The statement hung between us, revealing more than she intended. Pinnacle was not just struggling, they were in serious trouble. If Pinnacle Manufacturing cannot meet industry standards, I said carefully, perhaps there are more fundamental business challenges to address than just certification requirements. Her pleasant facade cracked slightly. You know exactly what you are doing to us. Applying the same standards to all manufacturers that I apply to myself, I suggested. Yes, I do know exactly what I am doing. As I walked away, Donald appeared from a side hallway, moving to intercept me. His usual confident stride had diminished to something almost tentative. His face showed the strain of months fighting against the inevitable. 2 minutes, he said, stepping into my path, his posture stiff. That is all I ask. We need to find a way to resolve this before the final audit. Against my better judgment, I paused. I wanted to hear what he had to say, to see how far his desperation had grown. We made a terrible mistake, Walter, he admitted, lowering his voice to a hushed whisper, his eyes darting around the hallway to ensure no other industry delegates were listening. Would you consider consulting for us? Name your price. We can handle it through a third-party agency to keep it quiet. I am afraid I am quite grateful for my current position, I replied, echoing his dismissive words from our last performance review. As I stepped around him toward the panel discussion, he called after me. This is not over, Walter. I turned back briefly. You are right about that, Donald. For Pinnacle, this is just beginning. What I could not tell him, what I could not tell anyone yet, was that the true reckoning was still coming. Because while updating industry standards had created problems for my former employer, those changes were never about revenge. They were simply good business practice, long overdue improvements that benefited the entire sector. My actual plan was only now entering its final phase. The panel discussion on ethics in technical innovation was my last official event at the summit. As experts debated the boundaries between proprietary methods and industry standards, I noticed Donald slipping out of the auditorium, phone pressed to his ear, face tense with urgency. 2 weeks later, industry news reported that Pinnacle Industrial Solutions had secured an emergency loan to fund strategic improvements. Reading between the lines, they were burning cash to meet certification requirements before losing major contracts. Back at the authority headquarters, my team had begun the second phase of our standards modernization, transparent attribution protocols. This new framework would require companies to properly credit technical innovations to their original developers, both to recognize individual contributions and to create clear chains of intellectual ownership. The patent system already does this, argued one board member during our proposal review. Patents are expensive, time-consuming, and often impractical for process innovations, I explained. Many breakthrough methods are developed by employees who lack resources to patent their work independently, while companies claim these innovations as proprietary without acknowledging creators. After 3 hours of debate, the board approved the initiative with one significant modification. It would be implemented as a voluntary certification enhancement for the first year, becoming mandatory in the second. Companies need time to adjust their documentation practices, the board chair explained. This gives them a transition period while still rewarding early adopters. Perfect. The voluntary phase would serve my purposes even better than a mandatory rollout. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Neil Porter stood in my doorway, looking uncomfortable in formal attire. Neil, what are you doing here? I interviewed with your implementation team this morning, he said. They offered me a position starting next month. I gestured to a chair. Congratulations, but why would you leave Pinnacle? You have been there longer than I was. Neil's expression darkened. Things have changed since you left. They brought in consultants who blame everyone but leadership for the certification problems. 3 senior engineers were let go last week for failure to maintain technical standards. Moreover, they did so without the mandatory 60-day notice required under the Warning Act, specifically Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101. That is a serious violation, I noted. There is more, Neil continued, leaning forward. They have been going through your old files, claiming you deliberately sabotaged documentation before leaving. Donald told the board you orchestrated the new standards specifically to damage Pinnacle. They are developing a formal complaint against you and the authority, alleging conflict of interest and claiming you used proprietary code. They even produced a signed document stating you assigned all your personal software rights to them years ago. I smiled. Are they really? Because I never signed any such agreement. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forging a signature on a legal contract is a felony, which makes the document void ab initio. The next morning, the formal notice of Pinnacle's complaint arrived. I forwarded it to our legal team. Proceeding as anticipated. Please implement Protocol 37. The investigation by the Ethics Committee and the Industry Oversight Board was thorough. Our legal team presented my departure documentation, 2,347 pages of technical specs, and 126 training guides. The allegation of sabotage collapsed. More importantly, our forensic analysis proved my signature on their intellectual property assignment. Document was a crude digital forgery, a clear violation of California Penal Code, Section 470, with the forgery exposed and their flagrant violation of the Warren Act under Title 29's Section 2101 documented, the federal regulators stepped in. The Oversight Board initiated a separate investigation into potential securities violations and breach of fiduciary duty, since Donald and Clara had lied to shareholders about owning the proprietary rights to the calibration systems. The consequences were swift. Within weeks, Donald and Clara were placed on administrative leave, and their stock price dropped by 60%. The Eastbrook contract was terminated. Desperate to survive, Pinnacle's board offered to negotiate. They proposed a public reconciliation, back pay, and naming rights for my calibration methods. I agreed to help them transition only if they adopted the new voluntary attribution framework and admitted the truth. The board accepted. Pinnacle became the fourth company to adopt the framework, publishing a reconciliation that credited 26 engineers with my name, leading 17 innovations. Donald and Clara resigned in disgrace. Neil Porter returned to Pinnacle to lead their compliance department. 6 months later, under a new CEO, Pinnacle achieved full certification. At the next industry summit, I concluded my presentation on the attribution framework. My ex-girlfriend, Laura, now working for a competing standards group, raised her hand. How do you respond to critics who say this framework hurts corporate investment? I smiled. Innovation without attribution is appropriation. Companies that respect their talent thrive. Those that exploit them fail. This is not about revenge. It is about creating a system where excellence cannot be stolen. As the audience applauded, I thought of the envelope I had left on the conference table. The true victory was not in destroying my former employers, but in ensuring that the system they used to exploit me could never be used to exploit anyone else again.